Some of my books include The Trick-or-Treater and Other Stories, Unboxed, and Mouthful of Ashes, which I'm going to do a reading from today. Mouthful of Ashes is basically my love letter to The Lost Boys. It is an adult vampire novella, and it is also a commentary on grief and loss. So, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and dive right in, and I hope you enjoy this first chapter of Mouthful of Ashes. If Callie had known what would happen, she would have paid less attention to the radio station, would have focused more on the light in her sister's eyes, on the curve of her mouth as she smiled, on her freckles, on her friendship bracelet, which Callie and her brother had the other pieces of. But the tragedy of life is never knowing what comes next. "Would you rather eat only ice cream for the rest of your life, or cake?" Callie's sister Becca asked. "This is the worst game I've ever played," said Callie's brother Ramsey. "These questions are supposed to be morbid, Bex. Come on now." "Ice cream, for sure," Callie answered. "But Ramsey's right. You're supposed to ask something dark and a little tricky. You know that." Becca sighed. "It doesn't feel like the right vibe for that. I'm relaxed from a day in the sun." "You're the only one who didn't get burned," Callie said. "I reapplied my sunscreen. It's not my fault neither of you listened to me." "Would you rather die in a car crash or a fire?" Ramsey asked. "Maybe Becca's right," Callie said. "It's not the right vibe." Callie and her siblings had stayed at the beach until the sky turned pink and purple as the sun set, and storm clouds loomed on the horizon. All the other beachgoers had left. Callie and Becca sat back to back on the beach blanket. Beside them, Ramsey lounged in a folding chair with his legs stretched out and his feet in the sand. The oldest of the group, Callie had straight, shoulder-length brown hair and intense brown eyes. Her upturned nose scrunched when she laughed. She'd graduated from high school 3 years earlier and had next to nothing to show for it. She didn't know what to do for a living. Becca, meanwhile, had dropped out of high school this past year, her and Ramsey's senior year, to pursue cosmetology school. Her face was softer than Callie's and kinder. They shared the same eyes, but that was where the similarities between them ended. Becca's hair was reddish-brown and curled over her collarbone. The wind whipped strands of it around her face. Ramsey was pure ginger, with unruly red hair, freckles, and brown eyes that looked almost orange in the sunlight. His nose was crooked where a jock had broken it the year before, but rather than tough, it made him look reckless. They were so white that after a day in the sun they should have been red as lobsters. Only Ramsey and Callie were sunburned. Becca's sole affliction was her stomach hurt from laughing. Becca was the first one to address the fast-approaching clouds. "Let's leave before the rain starts." "Let's stay a little longer," Ramsey replied. Becca groaned. "That's what you said an hour ago. I have class in the morning, Ram." He rolled his eyes. "Beauty school barely counts." Callie laughed and Becca scoffed, leaning over to punch his arm. "Not enough school for your face," Becca countered. "You're twins," Callie pointed out. "Not identical," Becca said, laughing. Ramsey leaned over and shoved Becca's shoulder. The sun had even burned his scalp, a salmon glow peeking through his hair. "I'll drive, okay? We'll be back before you turn into a pumpkin, I promise." Becca rolled her eyes. "I'd feel better if Callie drove." "Why? Because I drive like a grandma?" Callie asked. "Doesn't make us love you any less," said Ramsey. They stood, shook the sand out of the blanket, folded up the chair, grabbed the cooler, and trekked back to Ramsey's Honda Pilot. Callie offered to drive, but Ramsey declined, sliding into the driver's seat. Becca sat beside her brother in the passenger seat, and Callie climbed into the back. Before he could start the engine, Ramsey's phone pinged. "Storm will be bad. Guess we should have left sooner," he said, frowning down at the screen. Becca huffed but said nothing as Ramsey started the Pilot. They drove out of the parking lot and onto the main road. Ramsey fiddled with the radio, but Becca pushed his hand away and tuned the station to NPR. The host droned on about unrest in the Middle East, some report that Callie only half listened to. One minute, the sky was overcast, and Ramsey had no trouble driving. The next, the sky opened, and Ramsey swore as rain flooded the roads. He had a white-knuckled grip on the wheel, but he still smiled at Callie in the rearview mirror. She always scowled at him when he drove. Later, the memory of the faces she'd pulled would rack her with even more guilt. "You're safe with me," he promised. "Eyes on the road, hands at 10 and 2. "Pay attention," Becca chided. Ramsey rolled his eyes. On the radio, NPR dissolved into broken static. Becca reached for the dial, but Ramsey swatted her hand away. You chose last time. Now it's my... Ramsey! Callie wasn't sure the scream was hers until Ramsey's eyes widened in the mirror, illuminated by the flash of headlights. They'd travel over the line into oncoming traffic, close enough to see the terrified people in the other car. Ramsey jerked the wheel to the right and overcompensated. The car screeched, tilted. Becca gasped, and Callie's world flipped with the car. The front airbags exploded in clouds of white. The screech of metal on pavement, blaring horns, and crash of shattering glass overwhelmed her, and she squeezed her eyes shut. If only Callie had driven instead. If only it hadn't rained. If only they'd left earlier, as they'd planned. If only one of those factors had been different, Callie wouldn't have blacked out upside down in the back seat, slammed forward in her seatbelt so hard she cracked a rib. She woke to the acrid stench of gasoline and motor oil, the sounds of sobbing and sirens, and the copper taste of blood, thick and heavy on her tongue. Callie tried to move, but the seatbelt kept her pinned in place, and her ribs protested the effort. Sharp pain flared up her side and spread across her chest. The dashboard pinged. The car thought a door had been left open. Intermittent flashes of red light made the cabin pulse like a heartbeat. Glass tinkled as someone moved. Ramsey groaned, but that was good. He was still alive. Also upside down, he struggled to unclip his seatbelt before giving up. Callie, Ramsey croaked. Yeah, Ram, she said. I'm here. Becca, he ventured. Callie froze. Something told her not to look for their sister, that she was better off not knowing, but she had to know. She had to. Ram, be careful, she said. Don't move her too. Ramsey touched Becca's shoulder. She leaned out the window, making it impossible to see her head or face. Ramsey shook Becca. No response. He looked back at Callie, eyes pleading, asking when neither one of them wanted to answer. Try again. Callie's voice was hoarse. A little harder. Becca. Ramsey shook her shoulder more insistently. Becca made no sound, and he tried again. Bex, please, I need you. We need you. Callie's vision tunneled. She fought the urge to pass out. She had to know what had happened to Becca if she was alive. Ramsey surged forward in his seat. He grabbed Becca's shoulder with both hands and pulled her into the cabin. She slumped against the dashboard. Becca's head was gone. Callie clasped her hands over her mouth to stifle a scream and looked out the window. The red light continued to flash, draping her sister's severed head in a crimson glow as it lay in a sea of broken safety glass, revealing an expression of terror on Becca's face that equaled Callie's own.